Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you are. Thank you very much for attending today, and I hope you find this session useful. So my name's Dean Powell. I'm one of the science and technical specialists for GFI Asia Pacific. And joining me today is Dr. Wasawan Nusikal, who's our plant-based science and technology specialist. So today we'll both be presenting. I will start off, and then Wasawan will take over during the presentation. Just before we start, I'll note, I'm sure most or all of you are familiar at this point, but if you do want to ask questions, and we will be having a Q&A session at the end, please use the Q&A box as opposed to the chat in Zoom, as that's where we'll be drawing our questions from. And then you can also see what other questions are being asked as well. With that being said, we'll kick this off. And just to note, this is being recorded and we'll upload this to our YouTube channel later for those that can't attend, or if you want to come back and see any more details that you might miss. So we're going to be speaking for about half an hour, and then we'll jump to our Q&A after that. So just for those that aren't necessarily aware of GFI, if you might have received this link from someone else and haven't heard of us before, I'll quickly go over who we are, our different funding mechanisms, and then specifically our white space collaborations RFP that's open at the moment, where Wasawan and I will talk about some of the different focus areas there. And then we'll talk a bit about our IP and some of our other frequently asked questions around our grants program, for those that might have some initial questions. And then afterwards, we'll just quickly go into some of the resources and other opportunities that GFI offers for researchers working in this space. And then we'll open it up to Q&A from there. So for those that aren't familiar with the Good Food Institute, or GFI as we call ourselves, we're a global network of nonprofits. We have 6 offices globally. You can see where those are located on the screen there, and 110 plus staff globally. We're completely funded by charitable donations, so we're not driven by any particular company, government, or other vested interests. And so in general, we believe that accelerating the shift to a sustainable, healthy, and just food system through the use of alternative proteins will be the key answer to address global challenges such as climate change and food security with a growing global population. And so with this mission in mind, we focus on 3 main areas of work, which you can see on the screen here. So Wasawan and I sit under our science and technology team. We focus on analyzing and identifying key bottlenecks facing the alternative protein industry, working towards mobilizing funding and research projects to address these, and also helping to develop the workforce, both for further research and development and for actual commercial production of these products. Outside of that, we also have a corporate engagement department, which widely consults with investor communities and food companies across the globe, ranging from the largest multinational traditional meat companies through to brand new emerging startups. And then finally, our policy department is helping to carve a path for smooth implementation of these new technologies, and additionally mobilize public funding and research dollars to accelerate their uptake and development. And so this is what it's all about. We see the solution of alternative proteins under these 3 categories. So these are alternatives, non-animal protein to non-animal protein sources as alternatives to replace those typically provided by animal products such as meat, eggs, and dairy. And so first there is plant-based meat, which I'm sure you're all aware of, with the focus on recapitulating the organoleptic qualities of meat through plant protein processing and other ingredients. Then we have fermentation, for the use of hyper-efficient microbial fermentation to use as high protein meat analogs, or as will be the focus today, to produce functional ingredients for uses in plant-based and cultivated products. And finally, we have cultivated meat, which is the use of animal cells grown outside the animal to produce real meat, which is going to be the other main focus of our grant call. And so if we look at our research grant program as a whole, it's an important part of the work we do to enable open access, knowledge sharing, and generation to improve the sensory aspects of alternative protein products, help companies lower the cost of production, and enable quicker scale up. So researchers from academia, government, industry, and nonprofits are eligible to apply as long as you are able to meet our conditions. And as you can see on the screen, we've awarded over $13 million for over 70 discrete research projects since we started this program in 2019. Drilling down to the next level, so we have three discrete funding mechanisms, as you can see on the screen. So starting from the left, we have our annual competitive research grant program. So this is open once a year, and this is our largest effort where we accept proposals up to $250,000 US for projects up to 2 years in duration. So our next call for this program will be in 2022. We don't have a specific date yet, but I'm sure it will be in the first half of the year, potentially the first quarter. This will have quite specific proposal criteria. So for reference, our call this year was focused on enabling the creation of whole cut 3D meat and seafood products. We haven't decided what the criteria will be yet, but we do communicate that as early as possible. Next, we have our white space collaborations grant, which is the call that is open at the moment and will be so until the 1st of November. So this is for proposals up to $100,000 US and 1 year in duration. And again, this has specific proposal criteria, which we'll get into in a minute. But finally, we then have our exploratory research grants program. So this is our smallest and most nimble funding mechanism, where projects of up to $50,000 US are accepted for 6 months in duration. And there's no specific criteria for these. We accept any pioneering idea as long as it fits within our overall ethos of accelerating alternative protein production. And so applications for this are accepted continually on a rolling basis, and we try and commit to responding to an application within the following calendar month. So diving more into our white space collaborations, we have two priorities for research calls for this. The first, which I'll talk about, is, as you can see on the screen, generating cell lines for cultivated meat research. And so just a bit on the rationale behind why we picked this as one of our grant core focuses. So I haven't gone into the process of cultivated meat, but it's self-evident that you need to have isolated cells to then grow them outside the animal. So isolating cells is a primary initial R&D challenge for many cultivated meat companies. And procuring existing cell lines or establishing new cell lines is also a barrier to entry for academic researchers who wish to contribute to advances in cultivated meat more widely. So the initial isolation protocols constitute fundamental knowledge, which we think is best generated and disseminated in an open access manner, so that companies can focus on other aspects of the process with greater potential for commercial advantage. And once cell lines have been established, researchers often cannot efficiently find them or negotiate access to them currently. And at the same time, maintaining and shipping cell lines poses a burden to labs that have to develop them, even if those labs are amenable to sharing in the first place. So finding cell lines and protocols for seafood species is actually an even bigger challenge than for terrestrial species, due to the more nascent nature of aquatic cell culture and the number of species that are commonly consumed compared to the few terrestrial species that are consumed. And so as an organization, we've observed that cell line generation and public availability has been a persistent problem, despite the rapidly increasing interest in this sector and the increasing number of researchers and companies that are taking part in it. So that's why we've made this the focus for our grant call here, to try and help amend that. Just to go into some of the high-level details about what we require for proposals in this area. So we're accepting proposals for avian and aquatic species. There's more details on which specific species in the RFP, and we're seeking either induced pluripotent or embryonic stem cells, as well as immortalized adult stem cells of various lineages. These are all the lines that are relevant to cultivated meat, and you can see the details of those in the RFP as well. And so based on those species, I will note, if you feel that a particular species would benefit from cell line generation, but is not included in our list of species in the RFP, you can reach out to us and put the case forward for why you think we should consider another species. So please don't feel left out if a species that you're working on isn't in our initial list. And so just around the terminology here, so we define spontaneous immortalization as a process whereby primary cells, so cells isolated from an animal, are serially subcultured until clonal populations of immortalized cells arise from spontaneous genetic variation over time. So that's a non-genetic modification method when we look at kind of food classification. But then for forced or genetically modified lines, GM has different definitions globally, but broadly we can consider GM to mean any intentional genome editing or engineering, any intentional insertions or deletions to the genome, etc. To our knowledge, spontaneous immortalization that meets the above definition would actually still fall outside of GM regulations. And when we talk about this topic, we understand that researchers could collect a variety of data that demonstrates cell immortality, and we acknowledge that it might be hard to develop a cell line and demonstrates its immortality within the 1-year timeframe of this grant call. So, to culture cells for greater than 50 to 60 population doublings, which would demonstrate that they can double past the Hayflick limit, could realistically take over 100 days in length, and so would really compress that timeline for the grant. So we would welcome other data that researchers propose that could serve as useful proxies, in addition to demonstration of however many population doublings can be obtained within a given time frame, and that those cells are still continuing to double at the end of the project. And so spontaneous immortalization finally is by definition spontaneous and not guaranteed. So for this reason, we would probably recommend researchers that are pursuing spontaneous cell line generation should also look at pursuing forced or genetic modification methods in parallel to increase the chances of a successful outcome from the project, and would therefore give us greater confidence in the proposal itself. And so just looking at commercial considerations, so many companies are prioritizing spontaneously immortalized cell lines for initial products commercialization. And this is really due to the regulatory uncertainty around whether genetically modified cell lines will be allowed, or in which jurisdictions they'll be allowed and under what conditions. The only public guidance on cell line characterization for commercial purposes are the following points on the screen. And these were put out by the Singapore Food Authority and updated late last year, as they're the only jurisdiction with cultivated meat regulation in effect to date. So I won't read through all of these, but they are there. And if you would like to read those in more context, we can provide the link to the Singapore Food Authority declaration on that topic. And in addition to that, we'd also suggest obtaining records of the health history of the donor animal, if possible, would be an important consideration, as that may come into play for other jurisdictions regulating cell lines for cultivated meat. And just finally on this topic, so GFI has a memorandum of understanding with the US company KERAFAST. They're a reagents company that provides difficult to access bioresearch materials to the global scientific community. And our agreement establishes a cell line repository managed by KERAFAST, which will include characterization and quality control data for each line, and a straightforward ordering system. So they can manage license agreements, maintenance and shipping, as if you want to put forward a proposal but aren't keen on that aspect of the follow-up, you could include this as an option in your proposal for how that could be managed outside of your own research group. So with that, I'll hand over to Wasimon to talk about priority 2 for the grant call. Thanks, Wasimon.
Thank you, Dean. So let's move on to the second priority we have identified. So at GFI, we realized that the availability of suitable lipids ingredient that can help enhance plant-based meat and seafood product is still lacking. Next slide, please. In animal meat, fat are a very essential component to deliver positive attribute of meat, such as juiciness, tenderness, and in many cases, it is a key component in meat eating experience. For plant-based meat, this is one of the biggest challenges before we can reach consumer acceptance of plant-based meat products. Because currently the available ingredient portfolio do not allow us to mimic the behavior and function of animal fat. This is a clear bottleneck of plant-based, especially the whole-cut barbell meat type products. And additionally, in the seafood alternative space, the lack of appropriate animal-free omega-3 fatty acids prevent the progression of these product categories. So we are aware of this limitation and therefore believe that functional fat ingredients from non-animal sources are highly in demand. Next slide, please. Therefore, we are seeking for a research proposal that plan on developing a novel fats and or fatty acid ingredients with animal fat profile, such as a milk ingredients and or the ability to remain solid at room temperature and upon cooking for a plant-based meat or plant-based seafood application. These ingredients must come from animal-free sources. It can be developed from modifying the existing plant source oil. It can be made by microbial fermentation or in vitro enzymatic methods. Please note that fat ingredients from animal cell culture are not included in this RFP. This is because we already see several startups already working on the culture of fat cells. The other proposal that we will consider are the development of methods to encapsulate or incorporate fat and fatty acid ingredients into plant-based meat products, and the methods in preventing fat ingredient degradation in these products. Next slide, please. Here are some of the potential solutions we have identified. This list is, of course, not comprehensive, but it is an example to give you the idea of what type of solution we think it might be good for our research problems. So from this slide, the first three topics can address the lack of animal-free functional solid fat for alternative meat. By exploring alternative method in fat production using microbial strain development and target molecule selection, we can potentially produce animal-free functional fat ingredients that behave like animal fat. Also, the method of increasing these ingredients' stability when incorporating into alternative beef products are also in demand. Some of the examples are the oleaginous yeast, which naturally synthesize and accumulate high level of lipids. It can be the solution for fat production for plant-based meat, as well as protection of these fats. Even though fat encapsulation has been studied for a long time, the method suitable for alternative protein processing has not been explored. And therefore, this is also something that we'll be interested in as well. For the bottom three topics, these address the lack of affordable and stable animal-free omega-3 fatty acids. This is a target for alternative seafood spaces. As we have explored, omega-3 fatty acid fortification in alternative seafood is essential to attract health-conscious consumer into this type of product. And these products should have similar amount of beneficial DHA and EPA as their animal counterparts. So we need a novel method in producing these ingredients. Some methods such as precision fermentation and in vitro enzymatic method can be explored in the production of omega-3 fatty acid. And to deliver the beneficial properties, the method to prevent oxidation of these ingredients is also important. We still do not have a full understanding of how alternative protein processing can impact omega-3 fatty acid oxidation. With the shear force, high pressure, and high temperature of this process, therefore, exploring the method of inhibiting oxidation of omega-3 fatty acid before, during, and after plant-based seafood processing is crucial in improving these products. And last but not least, there's a lack of affordable omega-3 animal-free ingredients. So far, many companies or many alternative seafood companies actually use supplemental grade omega-3 to supplement their product. However, this push the cost of production higher and make the price of this product higher. And this is not what we want, because eventually we want to reach a price parity with the animal counterparts product. So here, like plant molecular farming to produce omega-3 fatty acid can potentially be the solution. Next slide, please. So we have covered what is the topic of focus in this RFP. I also want to spend some time to clarify some of the topic that we won't be funding. This following topic is not in GFI scope and therefore will not be considered in this RFP. At GFI, we still believe that plant-based meat, culture meat, and fermentation are more sustainable than insect-sourced protein, and that is why it is not in our focus. We also do not fund study done on human subjects. And while we are aware that market research, consumer study, life cycle analysis, and economic investigation are important, it is the work that have been done extensively by other organizations. Also, since GFI main focus is on the science and technology side of the business, we won't be funding this project as well. Next slide, please. So what would happen when you submit this proposal to us? All of the submit proposal will be reviewed by our scientific committee, which consists of GFI scientists as well as external experts on the topic, both from academia and industry. The proposal will be evaluated under the following criteria shown here. The scientific alignment is whether the proposal addresses the challenge and opportunities specified in this RFP. For the expected impact, you should be consider the potential impact on sensory characteristic, price point, and production capacity of alternative proteins when designing your proposal. In terms of contribution to scientific community, this is because GFI try to promote open sources R&D. Therefore, we would like to know what is your plan in sharing data, protocol, result, or any research to a larger scientific community in alternative protein field. So in this case, any research that you prefer to keep secret may not be suitable for our grant program. In terms of project planning, we want to see a realistic timeline with prioritization on impactful work. We also look for clarity, soundness, and logic in research plan. And last but not least, the commercial relevance. It would be great if you can outline the part for your research outcome and how those outcomes can help advancing the alternative protein industry in a meaningful way. With all this review ongoing, after you submit your proposal and after our deadline in November 1st, you should be notified of the outcome within 6 weeks after the deadline. Any more details of this reviewing process can be found in the FAQ link in the RFP document. Next slide, please. So I understand that those of you might have a question regarding, how your work can be protected if it meant to be open access. So here I just want to share the GFI policy on IP protection. Since the purpose of our program is to create open access to, and this is to benefit industry and global society as a whole, we expect that the data from your research will be shared to help advance the entire field. Exception will be limited and will be accepted only when we have alternative conditions negotiated and agreed upon in writing before we release any fund. So we can, the patent can be written, but we would like to see that it will be, for the commercial license, it will be non-exclusive. And for a non-commercial license, it will be under royalty-free basis. So with that, I will give the stage to Dean, and he can help us wrap up.
Thanks, Wasimon. So just based on everything we've been talking about there, you can find more detail and all of the written elements of what we've discussed at the address on screen, gfi.org/research grants. Additionally, you'll also be able to find examples of projects that are currently funded and underway, as well as previous projects that have now concluded. So that can provide a bit more context around the types of projects that we like to fund and how they've been characterized. Additionally, I did just want to highlight 2 other resources before we finish up. So the first here is that we recommend researchers explore our innovation priorities and solutions database, which you can see on the right, or a screenshot of on the right here. So our ASAP initiative really revolves around us trying to identify the pressing scientific and technological challenges facing the alternative protein industry. And so this is actually based on our own technical analyses and papers that we've put out, but also through our extensive industry and research outreach and consultation. So this was both directly and expressly for the purpose of setting up this database, and just through our day-to-day work in engaging with, I would say, the vast majority of alternative protein companies and researchers around the world. And so through this, we've kind of distilled our insights and conversations down into a number of specific research questions and opportunities, more business-related ideas, as well as more systems-based issues where there may be needs for government intervention or larger industry association activities. So there's different ways that you can actually filter this database. So if you're interested only in research ideas, you can do that. If you're more focused on startup or business opportunities, you can also filter it from that, etc. And you can find that at that address on screen, gfi.org/solutions. And for the researchers in the audience, we do have a collaborative researcher directory, which you can find at the address you see there. We really encourage researchers to sign up to this. We are APAC based, so we're really targeting APAC researchers, which we hope are many of you are in the audience now. You can see from the examples on the screen here, this allows you to advertise your expertise and interest in collaboration, as well as interests such as if you're recruiting new students. When we do talk to these audiences, we direct them to these databases to try and find opportunities for themselves, rather than making direct connections, so that we can act as a nexus point to connect interested parties. So if you haven't signed up to that, please do. It's quite simple. And in that process, you can also then be signed up for our newsletters, or when we have future grant announcements, we will push those out to individuals that have signed up to our directory. And with that, I'd just like to say thank you from the both of us. I hope this has been a useful session, and please post any questions you might have at this point into the chat. Or if you do come up with some questions later on, feel free to reach out to us at the email addresses on screen as well. And so I can see that we have a couple of questions here. So I think the first couple we've kind of addressed. I think they were addressed after they were asked, but yeah, so the research will be made available publicly. Open access is a strong consideration for us, and it is generally, unless in extreme cases, a requirement to receive our funding. And I think, yeah, the project IP is co-owned, so that'll be equal ownership between GFI and the grantee. We have another question here from Thomas, which we can try and address. Have you seen that one? What's the one? The question is, so for the audience, engineering plants to produce bespoke meat fats such as omega-3 will take much longer than the 1-year scope of the grant. How do you see your shorter-term grant play into the plant-based meat fat space? So I guess I can just quickly add a point in terms of, I kind of tried to address this on the cultivated meat cell line side, in terms of we do recognize there are limitations in a 1-year grant process. And so you wouldn't be penalized for the, the practical impossibility of generating a whole plant system within a 1-year scope. And therefore, couching the extent of the research program to what would be achievable within 1 year, and thinking of relative milestones that can be accomplished in that 1 year, I think we would be amenable to that. Another element is that we do also encourage researchers to look at our grant funding playing into kind of a joint funding situation. So you may have another program funded, of which you could see this being an element that could play into it. We'd be happy to consider your application, saying that this is part of a larger program that's funded, and you would want to slot ours into that to make it more focused on an alternative protein solution, for example. Wasserman, did you want to add anything on this point?
No, I think I agree with your answer, and like what Jean said, like we know this is a short term, as in like 1 year. So we will accept any plan for display what type of data you will get and how those data will be applied further to help actually promote these fields. I think you answered that all right.
Thanks. We've got another question here from Charith. So is the funding limited to purely experimental projects? Would computational modeling and simulation focused projects be considered for funding? I think definitely from the cell line side, it wouldn't, as the practical generation of the cell lines is a requirement. And I think I can speak to the wider program in a second, but yeah, go ahead.
Right. No, I think it might be similar because right now what is lacking is actually a physical commodity to help formulator to generate products. So because when you mention computational modeling, we're not sure what is that supposed to be used for. So I'm unsure whether that would be considered as within our scope.
Yeah, but I would say in terms of the wider grant program, computational modeling is something I believe we have a project funded looking at bioreactor design and function for cultivated meat purposes, where modeling of bioreactor specifics and operational parameters is ongoing. So it might not be relevant for this white space collaborations grant, but I would suggest that you look into our other grant opportunities along that line, as we do recognize that computational modeling and simulation does play an important part in solving some of the elements of these technologies. So we don't have any other questions at the moment. Maybe if people
we have
need another minute to...
We have a question coming in the chat. 1 second.
Oh, okay.
Okay, I'll read this out. Should one proposal on fermentation cover all aspects suggested by GFI or just focus on limited aspect within GFI suggestion? This can be focused on one aspect that we suggested. The suggestion that made in the slide is only to give you the idea of solution that can be explored. So of course, with your proposal, it can cover one focus aspect.
Definitely.
Yep.
And I guess there would also be the option that if you think you have another approach that isn't covered in some of our suggested white space opportunities, we definitely welcome any relevant, innovative approach that's sufficiently justified. And just to give a second, in case we do have another question or two coming through, I still have my slide shown. I was actually just going to put up, this is some results relevant to the cultivated meat cell line generation portion. Our analytic team in the US did a survey of cultivated meat manufacturers and suppliers in 2020. These were anonymous, but gave us some real insights into what companies are actually doing around their use of media and cell lines. So these two graphs you can see on the screen here. The one on the left, this asked companies the principal cell types that they were working with, and they could select up to 4. So just in terms of if you're considering what type of cell line would be potentially most useful to generate, you can see here at the moment that myosatellite and myoblast cells are the most widely used, which is understandable, given that they're direct precursors to forming muscle tissue. Fibroblasts are also highly sought after or highly used, and generally they're quite easy to culture, so that's also understandable. But we are seeing that across the different types of stem cells and progenitor cell types, companies are using those as well. And then if we look on the right here, this is a forward-looking question where we asked if companies are producing or planning to produce these types of tissues in the next 12 months, which then leads to the types of cells that they'll be using. So of the 19, obviously, the vast majority are looking at muscle cells and tissue and fat or adipose tissue, which are the most important. But then fibroblasts and connective tissue are up there as well. So hopefully there's maybe just some interesting results that could help those that are thinking about what type of cell line would be important to generate. There is more data around this on our website as well if you look up cultivated meat media and growth factor trends results.
We have another question coming in. How many research grants does GFI support per year for the plant-based meat project? So as Dean has mentioned earlier, we have 3 research grant program. The annual research grant, which for 2022, we don't know the focus of that yet. And it could be that this focus can be relevant to plant-based meat as well. The second program is similar to the RFP that we are having, like the information that we have today, which is the white space grant. And this depends on the scope that comes out. Usually we have the white space grant 3 to 4 times a year, right, Dean?
Yeah, so previous years we did 1 quarter the annual competitive grant, and then the other 3 quarters a white space grant. But this year we folded the 3 white space grants into this one pooled funding opportunity.
Okay, so minimum 3, let's say.
And I would say on the front, in terms of the split between plant-based and cultivated meat and fermentation, generally based on the conditions for the funding that we're giving out, there's quite an even split between cultivated meat and plant-based projects. Fermentation is a newer area for us, so we've been funding less fermentation projects historically, but given that we see how important it is, I think we'll be funding more in that space. But it's generally an even split, and we will try and have questions that can be addressed through plant-based solutions. So for every grant call we have, there should be something relevant to plant-based, unless it's a special consideration. And I don't have the exact numbers on me, but we did put out a blog post on gfi.org in recent weeks about our latest annual competitive rounds, where I believe it was just below 50% that were on the plant-based side, just for context, which I think worked out to about 10, maybe 10 projects out of the 22. I might be slightly off on that.
And that's the exploratory grant or the total of all the grant programs?
Our last annual competitive grant, so the one launched in January. Okay. So I guess if we don't have any more questions at this point, we might wrap this up in a minute. Feel free to put any last minute questions in the chat now if you have any. But if not, I just want to thank you all for your attendance and attention. Please, if you're interested, apply, or if you may know other researchers or companies that are interested, please pass on this information to them as well. Specifically, for those of you that are based in the APAC region, which I assume would be most, Wasserman and I, part of our role is to support researchers and companies that want to make an application to improve it. So if you'd like to contact us before submitting an application, we can provide feedback and assistance in terms of targeting it towards our requirements to improve your chances. And so with that, without any more questions, I'd just like to say thank you for your attention. And I hope you've enjoyed this and it's been useful. Have a good rest of your day.
Thank you.